We have a few announcements before I jump into the series. So I want to first acknowledge any college kids. I know college is just starting up, and so we have a couple of our college ministry folks out in the Connection Center there after service. So if you haven't met Gary or Eric or Judy, you want to get connected, go ahead and connect with them after service. Next week's a big Sunday. We have Palouse Empire Fair Sunday services. So Palouse Empire Fair has invited Real Life Church Pullman to help conduct the Sunday morning service for that fair. We are still going to have service here. So I want to reiterate, I didn't think I reiterated that last week, that we are still having services here. But if you are interested in going out to the fair that Sunday morning at 10 a.m. for the service there, you're more than welcome to. They also are giving all Real Life Church attendees a $1 access fee. So instead of $15 to get into the fair for that day, it's only $1. So that's kind of cool. So if you want to go out there, that's next Sunday. It's a co-op with Colfax Community Church. And so we'll be kind of sending a team. Chris is going to be going out there. She'll probably be out there all week anyways because of the fair. But she'll be out there. Michael's going to be out doing that, as well as Dan Huber, who's be teaching. So more than invited to go out there. That'll be great to support what they're going to be doing. So that's next Sunday, 10 a.m., Palouse Empire Fair. And then this week, we're starting up our new home groups. So if you're looking for community outside of just Sunday, we have our new community groups starting up. You can register online for those on our website or on the app. And then Pastor Corbin will also be at the Connection booth after service. So if you want to have any questions, he'll be available after service to talk to. So this week begins our new community groups. And then for all you people who have kids in elementary, we have a free coffee coupon for you to take for your teachers all the month of September. So when you go and check out your kids after service, there'll be a paper you can grab, and you can sign the teacher's name as well as your student's name, and they can take it to their teacher this week for school, and that teacher can get a free coffee at the well. So we're loving on our teachers all the month of September. So make sure you grab that from Kelly when you go back there. All right, Informed. Congratulations. So we're starting it's not a new series, but it's new for the year. So last year, we introduced the Good Church, our church called Tove, into our community. And so every September, I'd like to just spend 2 or 3 weeks going over our values. This is our values here at Real Life Church Pullman, and just do a bit of a deep dive into these. Again, the first time we did these in 7 weeks. So I'm going to do them in 3 weeks this time, breaking up into two parts, or 3 different parts, looking at 2 values each week. But we want to make sure that we're reiterating these often. We want to make sure we reiterate what is the values of our community and what we care about, as well as things that we want to actively resist. And so we're going to be talking about that for the next 3 weeks, and then we're going to go into a series on discipleship called Designed for Discipleship after that. So it's going to be a fun fall. Let's jump into it here. So there's a psychologist named Milton Rokeach. He wrote a book called The Three Christs of Ypsilanti. He was a clinical psychologist, and he describes 3 patients who had delusions of grandeur, where all 3 of them believed they were the Messiah sent to save the world and God incarnate. So all 3 of these individuals suffered from the same delusions of grandeur. He had a hard time kind of breaking through this one-on-one. So each time he'd meet with them, he got no progress. So he decided to conduct a bit of an experiment. He put all 3 of them together in a room. As you can imagine to see how this goes. He started asking them questions. He said, one would claim, I am the Messiah, Son of God. I was sent here to save the earth. And Milton would ask, how do you know this? The patient would respond, well, God told me. One of the other patients would always counter, I never said such a thing. As you can imagine, this went around and around and around. What I think this teaches us, though, is when we gather in community, as if this was, even just 4 people sitting in a room was community. When we gather in community, we are often confronted with hard truths about ourselves. At the same time, though, these truths help guide us into truth and in reality, and therefore health. What helped these individuals was the opposition they had to confront about themselves, that they had to confront truth about themselves in a difficult way. And that's where they started to see health in reality. We are a community that wants to talk about the hard truths. I hope that you feel that way. I know sometimes we get a little heat because we are the church that talks about hard truths. That's a cool reputation. I'm happy with that. Are you guys happy with that? That we're a church that talks about the hard truths? But in the process, we are guided by the Lord's goodness. And that is a key indicator that we're not only just talking about hard truths to talk about hard truths, but we are being guided by God's goodness into a better and healthier reality as we pursue our Lord Jesus and his goodness. So not only are we talking about hard truths, we're pursuing the goodness of God. We're pursuing the lordship of Jesus and what it looks like to follow him in his goodness. This is why within this community of Jesus followers that we call Real Life Church, we take time every year to remind ourselves and invite people into the values of what we call tov here, or the Hebrew word for good or goodness. And we call this series The Good Church, which is what we're going to be looking at. Because I want to say that we commit to transformation. I hope that's true for all of us, that we commit to transformation, not for ourselves, but for the sake of others. And this is a key indicator in how we transform here. We don't transform for the sake of self-enlightenment. Kind of this, as John Mark Comer calls it, a Christianese Buddhism, where we're just kind of trying to reach this self-enlightened transformation. But we do so, our transformation is always done for the sake of those around us, for the community that we live in. Because Christian transformation, or being conformed to the image of Jesus Christ, is more for the sake of those around us than it is for us. Is that why we transform? It'll change the way you study Scripture. It'll change the way you pray. It'll change the way you live your life when you realize that transformation, that God is conforming you to the image of Jesus, not for only your sake, but for the sake of those around us, for our community. The hard truths that he requires us to acknowledge, the values that we are to pursue in times when it's difficult to pursue them, are things that would only sharpen us, but be the betterment for the people around us. When we as a community take seriously the pursuit of transformation by God's goodness, we see that it's for the betterment of the community, i.e. each other, our families, our workplaces, rather than just, again, self-enlightened Christians. We can know a lot of stuff, we can recite a lot of stuff, but that stuff in itself doesn't make transformation. It's word and deed of following Jesus. So the good church is our expression of God's goodness, his values, and what we actively resist here in this community. So again, I want to reiterate that for those who have been here this time last year, who went through the 7 weeks. You probably remember some of this will be, you'll remember some of this. I actually added a little bit of new stuff over the last year. But for those who haven't joined us, this is, your first year here. This is who we are. This is our community. These are the things we pursue. You college kids who are just joining us, I hope some of this just ingrains on you for your time here, so that when you go and live your lives, you go into other places, that Tov kind of goes along with you, is the hope. So let's talk about the good church. Again, last year we introduced 7 statements of Tov, and you can go back on our website. It's called The Good Church, and it has all 7 teachings on there. So if you want to go an even deeper dive into what those are, you're more than welcome to. But I just want to look at 2 today over the next 3, and we're going to look at 2 each day for the next 3 Sundays. Because all of these things are umbrellaed and exuded under what it means to be Christ-likeness. Our mission here is Christ-likeness. We are being conformed to the image of Jesus. The true north for all of us who follow Jesus is to live a life, again, in word and deed, that exude Christ and his likeness into it. To our community, do they see the words and deeds of Jesus when they interact with us? This is a key indicator of what makes the good church possible. This is it. Jesus is behind all of this. It's his Spirit that empowers us and guides us and strengthens us. Without it, we're just floating through trying to figure out goodness. He is the embodiment of it. So as we explore these values, we recognize that there are things we also need to resist. Transformation, we're going to talk about this a lot in the next few weeks. Transformation is just about as much as you say no to, as much as it is as you say yes to. Okay, transformation, I could probably even argue, is probably more so what you say no to than what you say yes to. Things that are temptations and pressures to succumb to are things that we need to be aware of as we pursue God's goodness. And so every value that we have also has a resistant that we must be aware of, a counter that we must keep in mind. So today's values, and I want you to recite them after me. We value empathy. We value people. So the empathy has a resistance of narcissism. The thing we must resist is this. I'm going to break down this more, but in essence, it's just the self-obsession with self. We value people, which is the resist institution creep. I like that term because it really is this idea of when organizations become more important than people, as it slowly creeps into the culture or ethos of a community. So we're going to talk about those two today. Let's talk about empathy. We value empathy. Let me define what empathy is first. So there was a doctor named Teresa Wiseman. She was a nursing scholar, and she identifies 4 attributes of empathy that I thought were really helpful. The first one is perspective taking. Do we take the time to recognize someone's perspective as valid? Do we take the time to really understand someone else's perspective is the first step in empathy. Number 2 is staying out of judgment. Now, judgment in English has a bit of a different connotation. We're thinking judgment, we're thinking Matthew 7 and the idea of condemnation. And we must always judge in the sense of right or wrong. That's not what Jesus is talking about in Matthew 7. He's talking about the idea of condemnation. Judge not lest you be judged is about condemning somebody. Do we stay out of condemnation when we are taking in the perspective of another person? The third one is recognizing emotion in other people. Do you recognize that emotion? Does that connect with you? This is the point of it. Do you recognize this emotion? Do you find similarities with where this person is sitting in the moment? And the last one is, do you communicate that recognition of that emotion? Do you communicate that, what that looks like to that person? In a way, do you make that connection of saying, yeah, I get it, I understand, I know, I feel it too? Empathy is really the idea of feeling with somebody. Empathy is about building connection. Empathy is the ability to feel alongside someone, even if you don't agree with them. I think that's key, is you might be completely in the opposite spectrum of them, but you can still understand and help to ask them to help you understand what they're going through. Within relationship and community, we are all going to experience the highs and lows of life. This is the perk of my position. This is my favorite part about being a pastor, is I get to see the best of your guys' world, but I also get to be a part of the worst part of it. And I really appreciate about what that means as a pastor. I mean, it's hard, it's difficult, but I really cherish the opportunity to be able to sit with you in the highs, in the lows. And as we're a part of community, we're going to see each other at our best and at our worst, either by what happens within this community or factors outside of it. Our empathy, our value of empathy is what gives us the motivation and the desire to be with people in those seasons, especially the painful ones. I think when you start seeing the character of empathy, you start seeing it more in the pain than you do in the highs. And pain is not like sitting in a deep, dark pit. If I had to give an imagery of pain, I think it looks a lot like this picture I'm going to show you. I think this is a good imagery of what pain looks like. Even the psalmist will talk about the depths and the pits of despair. And you think about being in the bottom of that. This is what it feels like to be in pain a lot of times, whether that be physical, emotional, whatever it is, things that are just a reality in this world. We've all lived long enough to understand that this is a reality in our world, that what we do in the darkness of the pit. Now, we have 2 options when we have somebody who sits in the pit. You can show sympathy. Sympathy is when we might sit on the outside of the pit looking down and go, I really hope you get out of there someday. I hope you're okay down there. I'll drop some bread later. Right? That's sympathy. Empathy is when we climb down into the pit. Empathy is when you're going to go, I'm going to climb down into the bottom of the pit. I'm going to just sit there with you. There's a difference between sympathy and empathy. Empathy will say, I hope. Empathy will say, thanks for letting me come down and sit with you in this. Empathy will say, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this pain that you have. Sympathy might say something along the lines of, I hope you'll be okay. In fact, value in empathy, we must stay away from things like silver linings. I think silver linings, I'm a very optimistic person, so I'm with you on this one, okay? Silver linings are not something that people who practice empathy from. Imagine this. I took a couple examples of painful moments like this. It says, I had a miscarriage. A sympathetic response that has silver lining would say, well, at least you can get pregnant. Anybody feel better about that? Nope. How about this one? I think my marriage is falling apart. Well, at least you had a marriage. Those are silver linings. They are not empathetic. Empathetic words are more like, I don't know what to say. I'm just glad you told me. Or, I don't know why this happened to you, but I want to walk with you through it. I don't know the answers. If people who experience doubt and fear, I don't know the answers, but I'm willing to walk with you and find them. Those are empathetic responses. Those are people who want to be involved and connected within that person's pain, within the pit of that person's life, rather than just giving them words to hopefully get through it. It's not fixers, and that's the problem. I think a lot of us wouldn't be fixers. We want to have the right insights, we want to have the right knowledge, and that's case one right here. I want to feel like I can give you the reasons why you're doing what's happening to you, but often I can't, and it's difficult. But empathy, when practiced, it can be life-saving. I have witnessed and experienced how empathy has saved lives. You know, I've never shared this story outside of just one-on-one stuff. So publicly, it's the first time I ever shared this story, but let me just preface it by saying this was a really dumb place for me to be. Don't do this, all right? Well, I get a call. This was probably, 5-6 years ago. I get a call from a mom whose son we've been ministering to. Didn't come to church very often, but, so I didn't know a lot about what was going on, but she was afraid, and she said, hey, will you go see my son? And what should have tipped me off right away was I'm too afraid to call the police. I should have probably asked more questions about that. But I said, yeah, definitely, I'll go visit the kid. I thought I was just going to go talk to him, see how he was doing. I walk in, right away I realized I should not be here. So I walk in, and there's a kid, probably 22, 23-year-old. He's pacing. He's carrying a 9mm in his room, or in the apartment. And I knew right away, I'm in trouble. In seminary, they don't teach you about this. They're not like, okay, when this happens, this is what you do. So I'm thinking, Micah was probably like 6 months old at this point in time. I'm thinking, this is it. This is how I go. And so I'm sitting on this couch, and he has a friend there. And his friend is silver lining everything. And this kid is really struggling, obviously, with life. And the reason they didn't want to call the police was that the mom was afraid that he would police suicide, basically, is the fear. And I can remember thinking, this kid's silver lining everything. I'm thinking, just please stop talking, right? Because he's getting more upset every time he says something. And I remember I didn't say a word. I think I sat on that couch for about 45 minutes to an hour, didn't say a word. And I think the only thing that I really said to him after that hour was, thank you for letting me be here. I think it was just that one phrase. Thank you for letting me be here. And I'm proud of you for reaching out for help. And you just see the conflict, the where it was the recognition of understanding that he was in peril that helped him to put the gun down. That then allowed him to open up a little bit, share about why he was so afraid and why he was in the place he was in. That allowed us to then get outside, to go on a walk. That allowed then eventually the real help to arrive in a safe way. And that was my first real run-in with, and it was kind of like, I wish I could say I went in there going like, I'm going to show so much empathy. It was really like, I better do this, I don't know if I'm going to make it out of this. Right? It was where I was seeing the silver lining and the empathy at work. And it's one of those things like if empathy is practiced and it's valued and seen, it will save lives. It is that big of a value to pursue, is that it is a life-saving value. Just like I think it helped in that situation. God's goodness is seen through empathy, because through it we see the fruit of connection and humility. We see a value of connecting with one another, and it takes humility to kind of remove yourself from the position so that you can connect with this person. Because like that story I had a hard time relating to him in that moment. But you have to remove yourself to understand what's happening before you, why that person is in that pit, and what is taking them there. Jesus' empathy is famous. My favorite passage that shows Jesus' empathy is John 11, 32 through 37, with the story of Lazarus. If you want to follow along, I'm going to read it here for you. It says, when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. The verses that precede this, Jesus says multiple times, he's not dead. He's not dead. Knowing he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. He knows this. But yet, Mary and Martha are struggling. They're in a pit. They're blaming him. If you would have just been here. You can feel the pain in her voice as you read these texts. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit. This is the empathetic response. Again, he could have been like, guys, get up. I'm going to raise him. Why are you crying? He doesn't do that. He's moved by it. He connects with them. He goes, yeah, death is a reality. Boy, yeah, this is really hard. I've seen the consequences of it, and it's destructive, and it breaks his heart. So he asks, where have you laid him? She says, come and see, Lord. There, at the grave, or at the tomb, he weeps. He connects, he mourns. He knows he's going to raise him. This is the paradox of this passage, because you're like, well, you know you're going to raise him. Why are you crying? Because he's empathetic. Because he understands the connection, recognizes the reality that these people are walking in. The Jews even say he mourned so much, he wept so much, it just shows you how much he loved him. That while he knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead, it didn't stop him from showing the love that he had for Mary, Martha, and Lazarus himself. He knew well this loss that they were experiencing of a brother and of a friend, and he shared in their pain. He connected himself to it. He showed empathy. Jesus met Mary and Martha in their pit, weep with them. He recognized their perspective, the brokenness of death that was shared, knowing that they will soon weep for him in his death. He didn't condemn them. He didn't say, oh, ye of little faith. He joined them in their mourning. He didn't condemn. He wept with them. He recognized and matched their emotions because of the love that motivated him. And this communicated that they loved him. The communication of sitting with somebody in pain is a marker of loving them. Jesus wasn't like, I love you. I love them. Can't you see it? It was observable. The people around him knew and they saw and experienced it. He didn't have to say it. He lived it. We serve an empathetic Lord and God who meets us in our pits. And as his followers, we reflect that same empathy in each other's lives. Again, you don't know what the neighbor is what they're going through, who you sit next to, the rows you're sitting next to. They might need someone who just needs to sit in the pit with them for a little bit. To recognize that what they're experiencing is a reality in their lives, even if we don't understand it. If we don't value empathy, which again requires us to be involved in each other's lives with authenticity and vulnerability, we risk creating a community that focuses more on ourselves, becoming self-obsessed rather than others-centric. Empathy is a great value to pursue because it focuses on the betterment of others. And if we're not cultivating, if we're not pursuing this, if we're not seeing this is an important motivation for me to be involved in other people's lives within this community, we risk falling into self-obsession. What I care about, what I want, what I need. It's about the I. And this is where we get the story of Narcissus in Greek mythology. A man who, created with good looks, decided to remain alone, rejecting all others to be close to him. Ends up falling in love with his own reflection, which is what the artist portrays here. He fell so in love with his own reflection that he ignored all other needs, slowly depriving him. Dying, leaned over, staring at himself. The tragedy of Narcissus was that he decided to not love anyone outside of himself. This is where we get the term narcissist. It's a loaded term, I know, in our day and age. But in essence, it's somebody who's just self-obsessed. Someone who cares more about what they have, what they can get, what they do than anything else. Individuals, of course, struggle from this. Communities, churches itself can struggle with this when it becomes everything the church does and not the community. We can risk this. When we focus too much on ourselves, not being intentional with how we love one another, we risk falling into the trap of Narcissus. When we tell ourselves we don't need anybody else, you risk falling into the trap of Narcissus. Again, I know it's hard to even let somebody into the pit, right? We have our own walls, we have our distrust, we have our own stories that tell us, well, I don't know if I can let somebody in. I'm much more comfortable going into the pit than inviting someone into my pit, right? Anybody else there? Okay, that's, again, we have to allow somebody in. We also risk the trap of Narcissus. We do the hard work of putting our own desires and wants to the side for a moment. What we think is right to the side for a moment so that we can climb into the dark pit and sit with them. That this person, this individual that's going through whatever they're going through needs somebody who's going to just recognize that experience. We focus on pits to sit in rather than reflections to fall in love with. Okay, in essence, we focus on pits to sit in rather than reflections to fall in love with, because there's a lot of reflections and images of what church is and what church should be and what makes it good. But I think that the subtle health of a church is how do you treat those who are in pits? If the people who are in pain could tell their stories about their community, what would they say? Would they say, I've been alone? No one cares? Or would they say, I had people who entered into it? They didn't just give silver lining, they entered into it. Do we focus on pits to sit in rather than reflections to fall in love with? Let's look at the next one. We value people. How many of you are people? Good. We value you. You're valuable here. So the beginning of the end of any church is when the institution of the church and its success matters more than the people. This is the beginning of the end for any church. This happens a lot, and it sneaks into the culture subtly and through success. Okay, so I have my culture curve here. You guys remember this from last year? The best piece of Canva art I got right here. This is it. So let me explain the culture curve, because we're going to talk about valuing people and resisting institution creep. So you have your baseline of health. This is kind of like a health, let's say, whatever a healthy church looks like, this is it. But then what happens is a church starts, and it starts with a mission. And a mission usually is a great thing, right? For Real Life Church, it's reach the world for Jesus one person at a time, or we go to restore, renew. Now I can't remember it. Restore, rebuild, renew. A mission, right? To reach. And it's a good thing. People get excited about it, right? Well, what happens is as success occurs, and now this is where we start to get a little dangerous, because success can mean whatever we want it to mean. You guys know what key performance indicators are in the business world, KPIs? We kind of set up these indicators to say, what does it mean to be successful? Well, for most organizations, it's butts and seats. It's for churches, a lot of times, it's how many people did we baptize? It's this is a word that breaks my back every time. Giving units, right? Success. And we get to define this however we want, right? But as it happens, we start to see influence. So things start happening. Impact starts to occur. Influence in the community. Influence in people's lives. These are good things, right? Influence is good. But then it comes into power. We're afraid to lose that power because power is an addiction. So as we grow influence, we have power. We start to go into self-protection. We have to protect the influence and the power of the organization. This brings us into theological malpractice. So self-protection, power, things, this institution creep, we see this lived out all the time. Protecting toxic leaders. I mean, man, goodness. Turn on the news, you'll find a new pastor, right? Protecting toxic leaders. We do that all the time. Spiritual emotional abuse. We start to manipulate or even what's called gaslighting individuals, questioning their reality because they might be saying, hey, there's some red flags here, right? And then that leads into things like silencing people, making sure those voices that are speaking against the power and the influence are quieted. We see those things in both churches, organizations, businesses too. We see those things with things like NDAs, non-disclosures, silencing individuals. Again, this leads into theological malpractice. Theological malpractice is the belief that places more value on the institution of the church over the humanity of victims, and it misses the central teaching of the gospel. When loving God and neighbor falls by the wayside to the preservation of institutional and professional reputations, then that by definition is theological malpractice. Again, we uphold leaders whose character we don't try to question anymore because they might be charismatic or fill seats well. We might tolerate spiritual, emotional misuse or abuse even to protect the reputation of the church. Well, we can't let it get out that this happened here. What about the reputation of the church? We silence victims. Again, these things that have happened to them, they can't even speak about it. The way to combat this is to be a community that values people over the institution. To get back to health means that we are going to value people over the institution because people are the image bearers of God, not the institution. People represent God in this world, not institutions. People make up the church. Whether you're a church of 5 or 5,000 doesn't matter, just because Jesus came for people. Now, people as community, we like to gather together. This is good. It's a good thing. The community is a good thing, right? But what happens is when the community becomes the institution, when we start to go, look at everything we have done, that's a problem. This is the Tower of Babel in Genesis, right? When we build a massive, beautiful city and we go, God, look at us. Look what we did. We're like you. Wow. But then we got to protect the city for all costs. And the cost is usually people. The sacrifice is usually people. Again, trace back any biblical idolatry. It goes back to the harm of people over trying to preserve institutions. Jesus' communities are always people first. Jesus' communities are always people first. If you put the graph back up there, Jenkins, I want to go through the bottom part there. So we have theological malpractice that's come to a head. Getting back into people first means that people are the mission. Remember that we're here for people. That's why we're not here to build a church. We're here to build people. Adelphoi is the Greek word for brothers and sisters. It's the word that's most often used by Paul in particular for church. To build a place of belonging and to have Jesus-like eyes. So people are always the mission. Let's look at that one first. Look at the story from Genesis to Revelation. The common thread through that is that Jesus came to restore humanity. That God's heart is to restore humanity, redeem that relationship that was lost on the 3rd page of the Bible in Genesis 3. This is the heart and mission of God, is continues to do that. This is the thread through from Genesis to Revelation, is God wanting to be in relationship to restore what was stolen from him in the garden. Now, as humans, again, we build institutions. We build communities that become institutions that do this. But the church is merely the engine of Jesus' restoration. It's where community has come and the people are refined. Church is not something that is always going to make us happy, right? Again, hard truths, right? Church is a place where you have to rub up against another person and recognize you have some sharp edges. That you have to confront some difficult things within the community. And then you got to listen to Jesus' teachings that are like, I have to love this person. I have to give my life over to this person, but they bug me. Right? This is church, baby. This is what community is. We build off one another. We wrestle with one another in that sense of how do we shape and transform our lives to be more like Jesus. Good churches exist to rebuild the lives of brokenness, to restore the souls of humanity back to their Creator, and renew hope in people. We renew hope back into people's lives. because that's what Jesus did. People were always the mission. It's been that way since the very beginning. You give me a church pursuing people over growth any day. Any day. People who are pursuing other people, who want to be involved with other people, be in relationship with other people over what do stat sheets and charts and what was our growth over the last year any single day. Because I played the growth church model. I thought that was the way to do it. Well, you go and you do all these things, you get these things going, and then it just grows, right? But where there's not relationship, if there's not actually people coming together caring for one another, it's just going to fall flat. In fact, it left me more empty and discouraged because there was always someone better than me doing it. There's always going to be a better church. There's always going to be a church that has better programs. There's always going to be a church that's got better teaching. Don't fall into that trap like I did. Commit to a people. See that the people you want to be a part of in your life, that you value, that you would say, I do want to sit in the pits with those people. See them as first. It was when I appreciated and focused on people God placed in my life, even for small seasons, that I got to see the truth of this. I can remember early on in ministry, and we had a church of, it was probably 20, 25 people in my first church. And we were on a Sunday, and we probably had 8 people in there that day, and as, for someone who had the kind of the growth church model idea, that was really discouraging, right? When you're thinking your success is tied into how many people are there. And I can remember we were worshiping, and all of a sudden it was like kind of like God just banged me on top of my head, because all I was thinking about was all the people who weren't there. And he was like, just focus on the people we have in the room. And it was like, yeah, you're right. What am I doing getting so flustered and upset and discouraged by those who didn't come? But focus on the people who are in front of us, people who are in our lives. Value them. And that leads into Adelphoi, that we are a family model. Literally Adelphoi, again, brothers and sisters, the family of God. Something that he's been establishing ever since the beginning as well, was bringing this family together through faith. It's one reason Paul uses this word more than any other word to describe the church. That people-first cultures consider one another not according to social status, ethnic status, roles, responsibility, even by their gender. That this was a radical thing in the first century. When you would have a patrician, a wealthy patrician sitting with a slave in the same room, and they had to be equals. This was transformative to the human reality. When everyone sat together equals in the eyes of God as brothers and sisters, when the slave and the master would call each other brother, is radical for the ancient world, and radical, I think, even for today. As we look at people by their worth, as we look at what somebody worth, I'm so tired of that term. What's their worth? Jesus created something new and different, that we see each other by people, that we are people, we are image bearers of God, we are people who follow Jesus. We have great value and worth based off of those two things alone, no matter what your bank account looks like. As a people, we belong to Christ by faith, these true children of Abraham, as Paul will say in Galatians 3. And if we take that and we think about what that truly means, it means that siblings, they care for one another. They look out for one another. They protect one another. They believe in one another. They trust in one another. To live out Adelphoi means all of those things, that siblings see the good and the bad and love each other anyway. This is what it looks like to be Adelphoi. This is what it looks like to be in community. Because there's going to be things that I do that just bug you. There's going to be things you do that bug me. And we work through them because we love each other. We're committed to one another for the betterment of each other. This is what good tov, goodness, looks like, pursued in community. Relationships foster belonging. Now, again, I'm going to talk about programs. I'm not anti-program, okay? I think programs have a good place in churches. But institutions tend to focus on preserving the program over what it could be doing to the people, right? So case point, when I first started pastoring, there was a ministry called Jesus Feeds. Jesus Feeds is what they called it. And it had been going for probably a decade. And it was kind of like our Real Needs Pantry, except it was more like you came in one day, and then we had boxes of food prepared, and we just gave them out. So it took a lot of work, like 20 hours a week almost for some of these people to have to get everything prepared, make sure everything was done. And so when I first started helping with this, when we first came down to the church we were pastoring, I mean, this was just burning people out. You could imagine. Like they're working 40 hours a week in their normal jobs and then coming in and doing this. And they were just done. Like they were doing it just because they were doing it. It was doing it because they had been doing it for so long. And the hardest thing that I had to do was to say, stop. We're not doing this anymore. And it caused a lot of feathers to be ruffled because it was the program. This is what we did. Right? Institutions, a lot of times they focus on the program of this is what we do when they realize and they don't recognize what it's doing to the people. Right? And programs are great because what happens is it builds connection with people. You know, I think about our men's breakfast, just one example, because you get together, you have breakfast, which is always fun, and then you get to hang out and talk to other people. Like as soon as it stops becoming about people, the program needs to go. That's kind of the way I think about it. People are what's important. People are not quantified down into, again, that crazy clause that makes me stutter, giving units, not butts and seats. People first cultures are assessed by people's ability to belong in relationship within the community. Do we cultivate an environment where people just want to belong and where they find relationship? Where there's going to be people who are proactive and pursue this and go, yeah, like let's connect with this person. Let's have a relationship with people that we may not know. Because the Lord doesn't see you as a number. You're not walking in and he's like, okay, this person's net worth is that. This person's got great talent here. This is theirs. No, he's basically going, this is somebody I really care about because I created them, I love them, and they represent me. Are they going to follow me? He wants to know your story the same as we do. I think stories are a great way to show what God has done in your life as well as who you are. He wants to know your story and how to meet you in it, same as we do. And the last one here, Jesus-like eyes, the perspective. People first cultures make good decisions towards people. Seems pretty apparent, but maybe it's not always that way. One example I think that Paul uses in 2 Corinthians 2, 12 through 13, I think gives a great example of Jesus-like eyes. It says, now when I went to Troas to preach the gospel of Christ, I found that the Lord had opened a door for me. Right? So here's this opportunity before him. I can go and preach the gospel. I can see tons of people saved. I can start new communities. All the things that we might measure as success in the eyes of the church, right? But look what he says here in verse 13. I still had no peace of mind, though, because I did not find my brother Titus there. So I said goodbye to them and went on to Macedonia. So here he was. He had this huge ministry opportunity in Troas, but he couldn't leave his brother behind. He couldn't do it if it meant his brother was suffering. He couldn't do it not knowing exactly what Titus was going through in Macedonia. So he leaves that opportunity and he goes to go be with his brother Titus. That is what a people-first culture does. They may have great opportunities before them. They may have great programs right before them. But if it's at the sake of people, we don't do it. If people are the casualty to our programs, we don't do it. Paul had a chance again to preach a completely new audience, grow the movement of Jesus. Success and more numbers awaited him in Troas, but instead of pursuing that, he turned away from it because he cared more about his brother Titus. Paul recognized and understood that people were the mission, that Titus wasn't going to be abandoned for the sake of the mission in Troas because that would be counter to what God had called him to do. The Lord sent me here for you, in fact, not to build Real Life Church. I wasn't here to build a mega church or to have a big church here. Wasn't sent here for that. I was sent here for you. To be here with your highs, to be here with your lows, to be at your weddings, to be at your funerals, to minister to your children, to be there for the college kids when they come through every 4 years. The people are why you're here. What did God call you to do? Or who do you to be? Rather than trying to do a lot for him. Maybe we get caught up in that terminology. We got to do a lot for him. We got to just keep these things going. Try just building a relationship with someone you don't know first. Maybe just call somebody this week that you haven't called for in a while, called a long time. Maybe meet somebody new and say, let's go have coffee. I know a great coffee shop. Just start with building relationships with people that you don't know, inviting people into your life, asking them one question, just a simple thing. Tell me your story. I want to know your story. Are you okay sharing me tell me your story? Can I tell you my story? best way to build relationships. Start there. So often we get caught up in trying to do things. It's as easy as starting with relationships. Take a coworker out to lunch, hear their story. And as Christians, we tend to sometimes get this like hidden agenda in the back of our head. Like tell me your story so then I can convert you real quick, right? Resist that and really care about this person. Because the most fruitful people I know now who still walk with Jesus are those took the time to know first. Took the time to be involved in their life. It wasn't just a hashtag or a tally saying, oh, got one today, right? Get to know people. Love them as Jesus would. So, in short and cut, let's do this. Let's reiterate. So we value empathy. And we value people. Amen?